Sarah Matthews had always been a light sleeper, but tonight was different. The hospital bed felt foreign beneath her bruised body, and the constant beeping of machines created a rhythm that should have been comforting, but somehow felt ominous. She kept her eyes closed, breathing slowly and evenly, letting everyone believe she was still unconscious from the accident. The car crash had happened 3 days ago. At least, that's what the nurses whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. But Sarah remembered everything with crystal clarity. The black sedan that had been following her for weeks. The moment it rammed into her car on that lonely stretch of highway. The feeling of her vehicle spinning out of control before everything went dark. She wasn't supposed to survive. Someone had made sure of that. Through her barely parted eyelids, Sarah watched her hospital room. Her sister Emma sat in the uncomfortable chair beside her bed, scrolling through her phone with worried eyes. Emma had been there every day since the accident, talking to doctors, fielding calls from concerned friends, and generally being the perfect grieving sister. Too perfect. Sarah had noticed the subtle changes in Emma's behavior over the past few months. The expensive clothes that didn't match her teacher's salary. The new car she claimed was a gift from their deceased mother's estate, even though Sarah knew that inheritance had been spent years ago. The phone calls Emma would take in hushed tones, always stepping outside or into another room. The door to her hospital room opened with a soft whoosh. Sarah kept her breathing steady as footsteps approached. These weren't the soft-soled shoes of a nurse or the hard-dressed shoes of a doctor. These boots had purpose, military precision in every step. Ms. Matthews, a deep voice spoke to Emma. Sarah had never heard this voice before, but something about its tone made her skin crawl. "I'm Commander Blake Morrison from the Naval Special Warfare Command." Emma's phone clattered to the floor. Sarah could feel her sister's shock radiating across the small room. I don't understand. Why would the Navy be here? Sarah's just a graphic designer. She doesn't have anything to do with the military. Commander Morrison's boots clicked as he moved closer to Sarah's bed. She could sense him studying her, and it took every ounce of self-control not to tense under his gaze. "That's not entirely true, is it, Ms. Matthews? Your sister has been quite busy over the past 6 months. We've been tracking some very interesting activity linked to her computer." Sarah's mind raced. 6 months ago, she had started freelance work for what she thought was a marketing company. They paid exceptionally well for simple graphic design tasks. Logo designs, website layouts, nothing that seemed particularly important or sensitive. The company was called Meridian Solutions, and they always paid on time in cash, no questions asked. "I think there's been some mistake," Emma said, but her voice cracked slightly. "Sarah just does graphic design. She makes posters and websites." "Posters and websites," Morrison repeated, and Sarah could hear the dark amusement in his voice. "Is that what she told you? Ms. Matthews, your sister has been creating identification documents, security badges, and access card for a terrorist cell operating on the West Coast." The silence in the room was deafening. Sarah felt as though ice water had been injected directly into her veins. Terrorist cell? That was impossible. She had been making employee ID cards for what she thought was a growing tech company. They had told her they were expanding rapidly and needed professional-looking identification for new hires. "That's ridiculous," Emma stammered. Sarah would never. She wouldn't even know how to... "Oh, but she would..." Morrison interrupted. "Your sister has quite the talent for document forgery. The IDs she created were used to infiltrate 3 separate military installations over the past 4 months. Good people died because of those documents, Ms. Matthews." Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she was afraid they would hear it over the hospital equipment. This had to be a nightmare. She had never created anything for terrorists. She was a graphic designer who sometimes took freelance work to pay her student loans. The Meridian Solutions contracts had seemed like a gift from heaven when her regular clients started cutting back. But even more interesting, Morrison continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, "is how your sister discovered our investigation. Someone with access to classified information warned her that we were closing in. Someone who knew our timeline our methods, our evidence. Emma's breathing had become rapid and shallow. Sarah could hear her sister shifting nervously in the plastic chair. I don't know what you're talking about, Emma said, but the words came out too quickly, too high-pitched. The car accident that put your sister in this hospital bed wasn't an accident at all. Was it, Ms. Matthews? When Sarah started asking questions about her clients, when she began to suspect something wasn't right with those ID card orders, you panicked. You couldn't let her figure out the truth. Sarah felt the world tilt around her. Emma? Her own sister had tried to kill her? You're insane, Emma whispered. I would never hurt Sarah. I love her. She's the only family I have left. Love, Morrison said, and Sarah could hear him moving around the bed. Is that what you call selling government secrets to foreign agents? Is that love when you convince your sister to unknowingly aid terrorists by telling her those documents were for legitimate businesses? The pieces were falling into place in Sarah's mind with sickening clarity. Emma worked as a substitute teacher, but she also volunteered at the VA hospital where she had access to computer systems. She had government clearance for her volunteer work with veterans' records. Emma had always been good with computers, better than she let on. 6 months ago, you were approached by someone who knew about your gambling debts. Morrison continued relentlessly. Someone who knew you had been stealing small amounts from the Veterans Fund to pay off loan sharks. They offered you a way out, didn't they? All you had to do was provide some information. Personnel files, security protocols, shift schedules. Stop, Emma whispered. And when they needed documents created, professional-looking identification that could pass initial security checks, you knew exactly who to ask. Your talented sister, Sarah, who thought she was helping a legitimate business. You fed her just enough information to make the work seem real, didn't you? Sarah remembered now. Emma had been the one to suggest she reach out to Meridian Solutions. Emma had said she had heard about them through a friend, that they paid well, and were always looking for good graphic designers. Sarah had been struggling financially and had jumped at the opportunity. But Sarah started getting suspicious, Morrison said. She began asking questions about her clients. She wanted to meet them in person, wanted to visit their offices. She was getting too close to the truth, and your handlers were getting nervous. Emma was crying now, soft, desperate sobs that made Sarah's heart break despite everything. So they told you to handle the problem. Make it look like an accident. Maybe your sister would survive and just be too injured to remember details, or maybe she wouldn't survive at all. Either way, the investigation would die with her. I never meant for her to get hurt. Emma finally spoke, her voice barely audible. They said they just wanted to scare her, make her stop asking questions. I never thought. You never thought they would actually try to kill her? Morrison's voice was ice cold. Or you never thought you would get caught? Sarah felt tears leaking from her closed eyes. Her own sister, the person she trusted most in the world, had betrayed her, had put her in danger, had nearly gotten her killed. The accident should have worked, Morrison continued. But your sister is tougher than you expected. She survived, and now she's a witness to attempted murder. More importantly, she's evidence of a much larger conspiracy. What do you want? Emma asked, her voice hollow. I want names. I want to know who approached you, who gave you orders, who paid you. I want every detail of every transaction, every meeting, every communication. I can't. They'll kill me. They're going to kill you anyway, Morrison said matter-of-factly. The only question is whether you cooperate with us first, or whether you die as a traitor to your country. The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of Sarah's monitors and Emma's quiet crying. Sarah wanted to open her eyes, wanted to sit up and demand answers, wanted to shake her sister until she explained how they had gotten to this point. But something told her to stay still, to keep listening, to learn as much as she could before revealing that she was awake. There's something else, Morrison said after a long moment. We know your sister is conscious. We know she's been awake for at least 12 hours, probably longer. Sarah's blood turned to ice. How could he possibly know that? The doctors briefed us on her condition, Morrison continued. Her brain activity patterns, her response to stimuli when she thinks no one is looking. We've been watching her, Ms. Matthews. We've seen her reactions to conversations, the way her breathing changes when sensitive topics are discussed. Emma gasped. Sarah? Sarah, if you're awake, please. She's awake, Morrison said with certainty. And she's been listening to every word of this conversation. Haven't you, Sarah? Sarah knew the game was over. Slowly, she opened her eyes and looked directly at Commander Morrison for the first time. He was younger than she had expected, probably in his early 40s, with steel-gray eyes and a face that had seen too much violence. He was wearing a crisp naval uniform with ribbons and insignia that spoke of extensive combat experience. "Hello, Sarah," he said quietly. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way." Sarah turned to look at her sister, who was staring at her with a mixture of relief and terror. Emma's face was streaked with tears, and her hands were shaking. "What?" Sarah's voice came out as barely a whisper, her throat raw from the breathing tube that had been removed the day before. Emma opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. "Your sister got in over her head," Morrison said gently. "She made some bad choices, and then she made worse choices trying to cover up the first ones. Now people are dead, and more will die if we don't stop this." Sarah closed her eyes again, trying to process everything she had heard. Her quiet life as a graphic designer had been shattered. She was now somehow involved in espionage, terrorism, and attempted murder. Her own sister had betrayed her and tried to have her killed. "What happens now?" she asked, opening her eyes to look at Morrison. "Now," he said, "you help us catch the people responsible." "Both of you?" Emma looked up sharply. "Both of us. Sarah is the key to everything," Morrison explained. "She's the only one who can identify the work she did, who can help us trace how those documents were used. She's also the only one who can testify about the attempted murder." "And me?" Emma asked in a small voice. "You're going to tell us everything you know about your contacts. Every meeting, every payment, every instruction you received. You're going to help us set a trap. They'll know something is wrong," Emma protested. "They'll expect Sarah to be dead or at least severely brain damaged." Morrison smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "That's exactly what we're counting on." 2 weeks later, Sarah sat in a wheelchair beside her hospital bed, staring at the computer screen that Commander Morrison had brought for her review. The photos on the screen showed the documents she had created over the past 6 months, but seeing them now, with full knowledge of their true purpose, made her stomach turn. "This badge here," Morrison pointed to an ID card with the Meridian Solutions logo, was used by a man named Carlos Vega to enter the Naval Air Station in Pensacola. He planted listening devices in 3 different offices before anyone realized he didn't belong there. Sarah studied the ID card she had designed. She remembered that particular order because the client had been very specific about the color scheme and font choices. She had even done 3 revisions to get the logo placement exactly right. "I made that," she whispered, the weight of responsibility crushing down on her. "I actually made something that helped terrorists." "You didn't know," Morrison reminded her for the 10th time. "You were manipulated by people who are very good at manipulation." Dr. Jennifer Hayes, the Navy psychiatrist who had been assigned to Sarah's case, leaned forward in her chair. "Sarah, you need to understand that you were a victim in this situation. Your sister and her handlers deliberately deceived you." Sarah glanced toward the corner where Emma sat in handcuffs, flanked by 2 military police officers. Her sister looked like she had aged 10 years in the past 2 weeks. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced with an orange jumpsuit that made her look small and fragile. "Emma knew," Sarah said quietly. "She knew exactly what those documents would be used for." Emma flinched but didn't look up from her hands. She had been cooperating with Morrison's team, providing names, dates, and details about her contacts, but the betrayal still hung heavy between the sisters. "Tell me about this one," Morrison said, clicking to another document. This was a security access card for a Department of Defense contractor. Sarah remembered the order because the client had wanted rush delivery and had paid double the normal rate. "They said it was for a surprise security audit," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger as she forced herself to focus on the details. They wanted badges that would look exactly like the real ones, but with slightly different employee numbers. They said they were testing whether security guards would notice the discrepancies. Morrison nodded grimly. That badge was used to gain access to a facility where classified submarine designs were stored. The person carrying it walked out with photographed blueprints of our newest nuclear submarine. Sarah felt bile rise in her throat. How many? How many what? How many people died because of my work? Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Directly? 14 military personnel were killed when their base was attacked using intelligence gathered from facilities infiltrated with your documents. Indirectly? We're still calculating that number. Sarah doubled over in her wheelchair, the weight of 14 deaths pressing down on her chest like a physical force. Dr. Hayes was beside her immediately, checking her pulse and asking if she needed medication for nausea. I need to fix this, Sarah said when she could speak again. I need to help you catch them. That's what we're hoping, Morrison said. But it won't be easy, and it won't be safe. Agent Lisa Parr from the FBI entered the room carrying a tablet and several files. Sarah had met her 3 days earlier when the investigation had officially become a joint operation between the Navy and the Bureau. Park was sharp, efficient, and had a way of asking questions that made even innocent people feel guilty. We've identified the main contact, Park announced, setting her tablet on the bedside table. Emma's handler is a man named Viktor Kozlov, former Russian intelligence, now freelance. He's been running this operation for at least 2 years. The tablet screen showed a surveillance photo of a well-dressed man in his 50s getting out of a black Mercedes. He had silver hair and the kind of face that would blend into any crowd of successful businessmen. Emma looked up for the first time in hours. That's him. That's Victor. He's expecting a status report on Sarah's condition, Park continued. Emma was supposed to call him yesterday with an update. Morrison turned to Emma. What were you supposed to tell him? That Sarah never woke up, Emma said quietly. That the doctors think she has permanent brain damage from the accident. Perfect, Morrison said. That's exactly what you're going to tell him. Sarah looked between Morrison and Park, trying to understand their plan. Sarah is still recovering from serious injuries. I'm not comfortable with using her in any kind of operation. I can do it, Sarah said firmly. I want to do it. Over the next 3 hours, Morrison and Park outlined their plan. Emma would contact Victor and report that Sarah remained unconscious with severe brain damage. The doctors had supposedly told the family that Sarah would likely never regain her cognitive abilities. Emma would express her guilt about the accident and her willingness to continue working with Victor to honor their agreement. Meanwhile, Sarah would be moved to a long-term care facility where Victor could verify her condition if he chose to. The facility would be staffed entirely by undercover agents, and every room would be monitored by hidden cameras and microphones. What if he doesn't come? Sarah asked. Then, we'll find another way to get him, Morrison replied. But Victor is careful. He won't leave loose ends, especially ones that could testify against him. He'll want to see for himself that you're no longer a threat. And if he decides I'm still a threat, Morrison's expression darkened. That's what we're counting on. Victor has killed to protect this operation before. If he tries to kill you again, we'll have everything we need to convict him. The plan was risky, but Sarah knew it might be their only chance to catch the people responsible for the death she had unknowingly caused. She also knew that Victor would never stop hunting her as long as he thought she might recover and testify against him. That evening, Emma made the call to Victor while FBI agents listened and recorded every word. Sarah watched her sister's performance and was disturbed by how easily Emma slipped back into the role of grieving family member. The doctors say she'll never be the same, Emma said into the phone, tears streaming down her face that might or might not have been fake. She recognizes voices sometimes, but she can't speak properly, and she doesn't remember anything about the accident or the weeks before it. Sarah couldn't hear Victor's side of the conversation, but she could see Emma's reactions. Her sister nodded several times, asked a few questions about when they might meet again, and finally hung up with what sounded like genuine relief. He wants to see her, Emma told the assembled agents. He said he needs to verify her condition personally before he can close this chapter of the operation. When Morrison asked, he didn't say exactly, but soon. He's arranging for someone to visit the care facility as a doctor consulting on her case. Park made notes on her tablet. We'll need to move her tomorrow then. It has to look natural, like a family decision based on medical advice. That night, Sarah lay in her hospital bed staring at the ceiling and thinking about the path that had led her to this point. 6 months ago, her biggest worry had been paying her student loans. Now she was preparing to risk her life to stop a terrorist operation that she had unknowingly helped facilitate. Emma had been moved to a holding cell in the FBI building, but before she left, she had asked to speak with Sarah privately. The conversation had been brief and painful. "I never meant for any of this to happen," Emma had said. "I was just trying to solve my own problems, and it spiraled out of control." 14 people are dead, Sarah had replied. "How do you solve that problem?" Emma had no answer. The next morning, Sarah was transferred to Willowbrook Extended Care Facility, a legitimate long-term care center that had agreed to cooperate with the FBI investigation. Her room was on the 3rd floor with a view of a garden that would have been peaceful under different circumstances. Dr. Patricia Williams, who was actually Agent Williams from the FBI's Undercover Operations Unit, explained Sarah's cover story to the staff. Sarah was brain damaged from a car accident, responsive to voices and familiar faces, but unable to form new memories or speak coherently. She would spend most of her time sleeping or staring blankly at the television. Playing the role was harder than Sarah had expected. She had to train herself to react slowly to stimuli, to look confused when people spoke to her, to mumble incomprehensibly when she tried to respond to questions. Agent Williams coached her on the medical details, explaining how someone with her supposed brain injuries would actually behave. "The key is in the eyes," Williams explained. "You need to look like you're seeing, but not understanding, like the connections in your brain aren't quite working." Sarah practiced for hours, learning to make her gaze unfocused, to react to her own name with recognition, but confusion, to reach for objects with the slightly uncoordinated movements of someone with damaged motor functions. On the 3rd day at Willowbrook, Victor came to visit. Sarah was in her wheelchair by the window when she heard unfamiliar voices in the hallway. Through her earpiece, which was disguised as a hearing aid, she heard Agent Park's voice. Unknown male, 50s, well-dressed, approaching target room with what appears to be legitimate medical credentials. Sarah let her head loll to one side and fixed her gaze on a point somewhere beyond the window, practicing the vacant stare she had been perfecting. Her heart was racing, but she kept her breathing slow and regular. The door opened, and she heard footsteps approach. In her peripheral vision, she could see a man in a white lab coat with silver hair. "Victor." "Sarah." His voice carried a slight accent that she hadn't expected. "Sarah, can you hear me?" She turned slowly toward the voice, letting her eyes focus on his face for a moment before drifting away, as if she couldn't quite hold her attention on any one thing. "I'm Dr. Petrov," Victor said, moving closer. "I'm consulting on your case. Your sister asked me to evaluate your progress." Sarah let out a soft sound that could have been recognition or confusion. Victor leaned closer, studying her face intently. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked. Sarah opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, looking frustrated. On the 2nd try, she managed to mumble something that sounded like "Sar." "Sar." "Good," Victor said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. "Do you remember what happened to you? Do you remember the accident?" Sarah stared at him blankly, then slowly shook her head. "No, don't remember." For the next 15 minutes, Victor conducted what appeared to be a legitimate neurological examination. He tested her reflexes, her eye tracking, her responses to various stimuli. Sarah played her part perfectly, showing just enough cognitive function to be consistent with severe brain damage, but not enough to be considered a threat. Finally, Victor seemed satisfied. He spoke quietly to Agent Williams, who was playing the role of Sarah's primary care physician. "The family is concerned about long-term prognosis," Victor said. "It's not good. Williams replied with the practiced sadness of a real doctor delivering bad news. She may regain some function over time, but we're looking at permanent cognitive impairment. Her memory of recent events is completely gone, and it's unlikely to return. Victor nodded and made notes in a tablet that looked official. I'll prepare my report for the family. Thank you for your cooperation. After he left, Sarah remained in character for another hour in case Victor was still monitoring the facility. Finally, Agent Williams gave her the all-clear signal, and Sarah slumped in her wheelchair with relief. You did great, Williams said, checking the recording devices hidden throughout the room. We got everything we needed. But through her earpiece, Sarah heard Agent Park's voice with troubling news. Victor just made a phone call. He's ordering a termination. He wants Sarah eliminated tonight. The lights in Willowbrook Extended Care Facility dimmed automatically at 10 o'clock, but Sarah remained wide awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the quiet conversations of the FBI agents positioned throughout the building. Through her earpiece, she could hear the calm, professional coordination of people preparing for violence. Agent Williams sat in the chair beside Sarah's bed, reading a medical journal that was actually a tactical manual. Two more agents posed as night shift nurses, making their regular rounds through the corridors. Commander Morrison was stationed in the security office, monitoring feeds from cameras hidden throughout the facility. How are we doing, Sarah? Williams asked quietly, turning a page of her fake journal. Terrified, Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. What if this doesn't work? What if Victor doesn't come himself? He'll come. Morrison's voice crackled through the earpiece. Our surveillance team followed him from the facility to a warehouse on the outskirts of town. He's been there for 3 hours, likely briefing a team. Victor doesn't trust important jobs to other people. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to calm her racing heart. The plan was simple in concept, but terrifying in execution. Victor would come to kill her, believing she was helpless and brain-damaged. The FBI would capture him in the act, gathering irrefutable evidence of attempted murder while hopefully taking him alive for interrogation. The part that scared Sarah most was the hopefully part. At 11:45, the building's security sensors detected movement in the parking lot. Agent Park's voice came through the communications network. 3 vehicles approaching from the east. Looks like a full team. Sarah felt her mouth go dry. She had expected 1 or 2 people, not a full team. Sarah, we need you to get into position, Williams said, helping her out of the hospital bed. Remember, you're supposed to be barely mobile, confused, and frightened. Sarah allowed herself to be helped into the wheelchair beside her bed. The plan called for her to be found trying to use the bathroom, as if she had woken up disoriented and was struggling with basic tasks. It would explain why she was out of bed, but still make her appear helpless and incapacitated. 2 minutes, Morrison's voice announced. They're at the service entrance. Williams, get clear. Agent Williams squeezed Sarah's shoulder reassuringly, then slipped out of the room through a side door that connected to an adjacent patient room. Sarah was now alone, sitting in her wheelchair in the dim light, waiting for people who wanted to kill her. The facility fell silent. Even the usual sounds of medical equipment and late-night nursing activities had stopped. Sarah knew that all the legitimate patients had been quietly evacuated hours earlier, replaced by agents, but the silence still felt ominous. Her earpiece crackled softly. They're in the building. 3 men, armed, moving toward the elevator. Sarah positioned herself carefully, slumping in the wheelchair as if she had fallen asleep trying to reach the bathroom. She let her head loll to one side and allowed her breathing to become deep and regular, as if she were in the kind of medicated sleep common in brain injury patients. 2nd floor. The voice in her ear reported. They're checking room numbers. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to remain still. Through her barely open eyes, she could see the outline of the doorway. A small part of her mind wondered if she was completely insane for agreeing to this plan. 3rd floor. They're in the hallway. Footsteps approach her room, soft but purposeful. Sarah heard the door handle turn slowly, and then, The door opened with barely a whisper. Someone entered her room, moving with the careful silence of a professional. Through her earpiece, she heard Morrison's voice. Visual confirmation. Target acquired. Victor is in the room. Sarah kept her breathing steady as footsteps approached her wheelchair. She could sense someone standing very close, studying her. After a moment, she heard Victor's accented voice, much softer than it had been during his medical visit. "Wake up, Sarah." She stirred slightly, as if responding to the sound, but kept her eyes closed and her movements sluggish. She mumbled something incoherent and shifted in the wheelchair as if trying to find a more comfortable position. Victor spoke again, louder this time. "Sarah Matthews, wake up." This time she opened her eyes slowly, blinking as if struggling to focus. When she saw Victor standing beside her wheelchair, she tried to shrink back, making a small, frightened sound. "Do you know who I am?" Victor asked. Sarah stared at him with what she hoped looked like confusion and fear. She shook her head slowly, then tried to speak. "Doctor? Are you doctor?" "No," Victor said, pulling a silenced pistol from inside his jacket. "I'm not a doctor." Sarah's performance became easier because her terror was now completely genuine. She tried to back the wheelchair away from him, moving with the uncoordinated motions of someone with damaged motor functions. "Please," she whispered, and the fear in her voice required no acting at all. "Don't hurt me. I don't understand." Victor raised the gun, pointing it directly at her forehead. "Your sister sends her regards." In her earpiece, Sarah heard Morrison's voice. "All teams go, go, go." The room erupted into controlled chaos. The side door burst open, and Agent Williams came through with 2 tactical officers. The main door flew open as more agents stormed in. Victor spun toward the main door, but Agent Williams was already behind him. "FBI, drop your weapon." Victor's training kicked in immediately. Instead of surrendering, he grabbed Sarah and pulled her out of the wheelchair, using her as a human shield while pressing the gun to her temple. Sarah cried out as her injured ribs protested the sudden movement. "Stay back," Victor shouted. "I'll kill her." "Victor Kozlov." Agent Park's voice came from the doorway, calm and professional despite the situation. "You're surrounded. There's no way out of this building." "There's always a way out," Victor replied, backing toward the window with Sarah pressed against him. She could feel the cold metal of the gun barrel against her skin and the tension in his arm as he prepared to fire. Through the window, Sarah could see red laser dots dancing on the glass. Snipers had the room covered from outside, but they couldn't get a clean shot with Victor using her as a shield. "Your operation is finished," Park continued. "We have Emma's testimony, your communication records, and documentation of every document Sarah unknowingly created for you. Even if you kill her and somehow escape, you'll never be safe." Victor's grip on Sarah tightened. "Emma is weak. Her testimony won't hold up in court." "Maybe not," Morrison said, stepping into the room with his hands raised peacefully. "But Sarah's will. And now we have you on camera attempting to murder a federal witness." For the first time, Victor seemed to realize the full scope of his situation. The brain-damaged witness he had come to eliminate was actually perfectly healthy and had been acting a role. The operation he thought was secure had been compromised from multiple directions. "You were never going to let me walk away from this," Victor said, and Sarah could hear the resignation creeping into his voice. "That depends on you," Morrison replied. "We want the people you're working for. We want to know who else is involved in this network. Cooperate with us, and you might live to see the outside of a prison cell again." Victor was silent for a long moment, and Sarah could feel him weighing his options. The gun remained pressed against her temple, but his grip had loosened slightly. "The people I work for don't negotiate," Victor said finally. "If I surrender to you, I'm dead within a week, whether I'm in protective custody or not. Then, you'd better hope we can protect you better than they can reach you," Park said. Sarah felt Victor's body tense, and she knew he was preparing to make his final move. In desperation, she did the only thing she could think of. She went completely limp, dropping like a dead weight in his arms. The sudden shift in her weight threw Victor off balance. He stumbled backward, his grip on both Sarah and the gun loosening for just a moment. It was enough. Agent Williams fired a single shot that caught Victor in the shoulder, spinning him away from Sarah. The gun flew from his hand as he crashed into the hospital bed. Sarah hit the floor hard, pain shooting through her healing ribs, but she was alive. Within seconds, Victor was surrounded by agents and being handcuffed despite his wounded shoulder. EMTs rushed into the room to check on both Sarah and Victor, while Agent Park read Victor his rights in a calm, clear voice. "You did good, Sarah," Morrison said, kneeling beside her as the EMTs examined her for new injuries. "You did real good." 3 hours later, Sarah sat in the FBI field office, wrapped in a blanket and drinking coffee that tasted better than anything she had ever consumed. Her ribs ached, and she had a few new bruises, but the doctors had confirmed that she had suffered no serious additional injuries. Agent Park sat across from her, completing the incident report. "Victor is in surgery, but he's expected to make a full recovery. More importantly, he's already started talking." "What's he saying?" "Names, locations, financial records. It seems facing a life sentence for terrorism charges has made him quite cooperative." Park looked up from her tablet. "This network was bigger than we thought, Sarah. Your work helped us uncover a conspiracy that reaches into several government agencies and defense contractors." Emma appeared in the doorway, escorted by a federal marshal. She looked exhausted but relieved. "The prosecutor has agreed to a plea deal," Emma said as she sat down, carefully beside Sarah. 20 years, eligible for parole in 12 if I continue to cooperate fully." Sarah nodded. It was a harsh sentence, but far less than Emma would have faced if she had been convicted of treason and conspiracy charges. "I know this doesn't fix anything," Emma continued, "but I want you to know how sorry I am. I never intended for anyone to get hurt." 14 people died, Sarah said quietly. It was a fact that would always stand between them, but it was also a fact that they would both have to find a way to live with. "I know. I'll spend the rest of my life knowing that." 6 months later, Sarah was testifying before a congressional committee investigating security breaches in military installations. The hearing room was packed with reporters, government officials, and family members of the victims of the terrorist attacks her documents had enabled. Sarah had spent weeks preparing for this testimony, working with prosecutors and investigators to ensure that her account was complete and accurate. She had also spent considerable time in therapy, learning to cope with the guilt of her unwitting involvement and the trauma of nearly being murdered by her own sister. "Ms. Matthews," the committee chairman said, "can you describe for us how you were recruited to create these documents?" Sarah leaned into the microphone. "I was approached through what I believed was a legitimate business referral from my sister." The initial contact seemed completely normal. As she told her story, Sarah saw the faces of the victims' families in the gallery. Some looked angry. Others seemed grateful that the truth was finally being told. She knew that her testimony would help prevent similar attacks in the future, but it would never bring back the people who had died. The hearing lasted 3 days. Sarah answered hundreds of questions about her work, her sister's involvement, the methods used to deceive her, and the broader implications of the security breaches. She also testified about Victor's attempted murder and the FBI operation that had brought down his network. On the final day, as Sarah was leaving the courthouse, a woman approached her in the parking garage. Sarah's first instinct was fear, but she recognized the woman as Mrs. Patricia Hendricks, whose son had been one of the Navy personnel killed in the Pensacola attack. "Ms. Matthews," Mrs. Hendricks said, "I wanted to thank you." Sarah was stunned. "Thank me?" "Mrs. Hendricks, I'm so sorry about your son. If I had known—" "You couldn't have known," the older woman said firmly. "But when you found out, you risked your life to make it right. My son would have respected that." Sarah felt tears she had been holding back for months finally begin to flow. "I wish I could bring him back." "So do I. But because of what you did, other mothers won't have to lose their sons the same way." As Mrs. Hendricks walked away, Sarah realized that she had found something she hadn't expected: redemption. Not complete absolution for her role in the tragedy, but the knowledge that she had done everything possible to prevent it from happening again. Viktor Kozlov was eventually sentenced to life in prison without parole. His cooperation had led to the arrest of 12 other individuals involved in the espionage network, including 2 government employees who had been selling classified information. Emma served her sentence at a minimum security federal prison in Pennsylvania. Sarah visited her twice a year, maintaining a relationship that was forever changed but not entirely broken. They would never be as close as they once were, but they were still sisters. Sarah returned to graphic design, but she also began working as a consultant for the FBI, helping to identify potential security vulnerabilities in document authentication systems. Her experience had given her unique insights into how legitimate business processes could be exploited by criminals and terrorists. 2 years after the attack, Sarah received a letter from the family of another victim, thanking her for her testimony and her continued work to improve security. Similar letters arrived regularly, reminders that her decision to cooperate with law enforcement had made a real difference. She kept every letter, reading them whenever she doubted that she had made the right choices. The guilt would never completely disappear, but it had been joined by something else: the knowledge that she had found the courage to do the right thing when it mattered most. On quiet evenings in her apartment, Sarah would sometimes think about that night in the hospital when she had first heard Commander Morrison's voice. She had been lying there pretending to sleep, listening to her world fall apart one revelation at a time. In that moment, she could never have imagined that the worst night of her life would also become the first night of something like redemption. The path forward had not been easy, but it had been worth walking. Sarah had learned that sometimes the only way to heal from a terrible mistake is to spend the rest of your life making sure it never happens again.